Hello, and welcome to Is Portland Dying? We are exploring the rhetoric being used to depict Portland's current state. In the last episode, we spoke with Ryan Haas from OPB and Max Smiff from We Out Here magazine. In this episode, we will be investigating policing in relation to the past and current state of Portland. Portland police have a complex history of over-policing the Black and other marginalized communities of Portland, such as the unhoused. Bruce Poinsette is a multimedia editor and journalist who can provide insights into this complex history Portland Police Bureau has with the Black community of Portland.
I don't think Portland is dying. I think Portland is suffering maybe from the same things a lot of cities around the country are suffering from right now. But I think just the framing of that I often hear in a lot of these people for Portland ads and sort of these scare campaigns that Portland is dying. I feel like it's just it's kind of this thing where it reminds me of the coverage of just using Chicago as shorthand for this is a place in chaos, and usually scapegoating poor people, scapegoating Black and brown people to get there. So short answer, I don't think Portland is dying. I think there are definitely a lot of public health problems.
Part of what Bruce is alluding to here is known as the broken window theory, which states any visible sign of crime or civil disorder creates an urban environment that promotes more crime. It is used to justify increasing policing. However, there is research that shows there is no evidence that policing disorder lowers crime, and that the broken window theory is incorrect in its assumptions, but has disproportionately impacted marginalized communities.
Even because a lot of people, when they talk about those laws, they'll say, well, it wasn't actually enforced that much, which, to be clear, that the law was that if you were Black and you tried to settle in Oregon, they could whip you every 6 months that you didn't move. And people will say, well, it wasn't enforced that much, but even the passage of those laws, having that on the books, has an intimidation factor. The biggest migration to Portland started sort of World War II, people coming to the shipyards, but even then that residue is still there. And then you have, with those same shipyards, that's where people moved for the Vanport, or before the Vanport floods, and then were displaced by the Vanport floods. And you've had basically Black populations in Portland, or at least the large concentrations of Black populations in Portland, basically displaced in a series of different events, whether it be the Vanport floods, whether it be the construction of the I-5 freeway, then the Memorial Coliseum, and then in the 80s, basically using these policies, these blight policies, where people would go around Black neighborhoods, usually Northeast Portland, basically pressure them to move or pressure them to sell. And that all factors into policing, because that was the big impetus for a lot of that was also using crime, using the rise of gang activity as a way to target Northeast Portland, and one, lock up younger people, but two, also just blight the area as a whole, paint it as, again, sort of this idea of this place is dying, this place is dangerous, and bring the property values down, move the people out, then bring in new businesses, gentrify it. And it's kind of similar in a way to what's happening really downtown right now, where it's, again, talking about this area, demonizing the area, it's using people's suffering as a scapegoat to get them out, pass policies to get them out. Ultimately, I would conjecture, I guess, to bring in new businesses, again, kind of just help the rich get richer.
Urban renewal and eminent domain ripped apart the Black community of the Albina neighborhood in North Portland. Its cheap land, perceived high crime, and lack of political power made it a target for eminent domain by the city of Portland to create the Memorial Coliseum, I-5, Emmanuel Hospital, and other projects. Over 1,100 homes were demolished in Albina, mostly belonging to black homeowners, and those individuals were forced into adjacent neighborhoods in North Portland. In 2014, a settlement agreement between the City of Portland and the Department of Justice was established in response to Portland Police Bureau's habit of unconstitutional use of force against individuals with mental illness. It was in non-compliance for 6 years. The Bureau finally came into compliance in February of 2020, but that didn't last long. Due to excessive use of force by officers during the anti-police brutality protests of 2020, which were in response to the killing of George Floyd, the Bureau was found in non-compliance again. Just how excessive did Portland police get during the protests of 2020? Well, here's an example. This is my personal footage from June 2nd, 2020, which became known as Tear Gas Tuesday.
This event is a lawful assembly. Leave the area now to the north, where you are subject to use of force, so that we are in attack condition. This is the Portland Police Bureau. This event is a lawful assembly. Leave the area now to the north, where you are subject to use of force, so that we are in attack condition.
A study released by Forensic Architecture shows that concentrations were high enough to cause severe and even irreversible health effects. Some of the highest concentrations registered 2,200 times the safe limit for exposure. In November of 2020, 82% of voters approved Measure 26-217, which would create a new police oversight system. When the ballot measure passed, the Portland City Council appointed 20 individuals to a police oversight commission tasked with creating the new oversight system and an oversight board. Upon receiving the proposal of a 33-person board in September of 2023, staff of council members and city attorneys rewrote the proposal to reduce the board's size and give power back to the police. Max Smiff was featured in the introduction episode, and he has been following the situation with the Police Oversight Board closely.
I think that the most important thing when we talk about how the history has shaped where we are now is that there's never been any justice for the behavior that's already occurred. Furthermore, the people who have exacted that hurt are still in positions within the police department, widely spread throughout. There really are no systems of accountability that have been put in place. I mean, we're talking about, I think, now 9 years since the federal mandate, the DOJ, inquisition into Portland police and the rules that have been put in place and the PSAP and all of those things that have literally done absolutely nothing. We talk about, even just the protection of the ruling class of people who have not had the public's best interest in mind politically, coming in just this last week and gutting a police accountability measure that people voted for, 82% of Portlanders voted for. So, and they come in and say, hey, we're going to actually put police on there and make it impossible for activists or people who have done, anti-police work or anti-carceral work to even be a part of this. So that's kind of how the history is impacting it currently, is that it repeats itself because the issues that have existed for long and multiple, in many ways have just never been resolved. We know that the lack of accountability, is what leads to over-policing and is what leads to the result of over-policing being the most observable among black and brown populations, right? So we talk about 34% of people in prisons that are black and brown, when we make up like 17% of the population. That's not by accident. I think that when we talk about policing, it's always about, for the propaganda side, it's always about how you need police, how police are keeping you safe from the violent thugs and gangsters that live in your neighborhood. And so this idea of oversight would mean that police would have to open up records into what they're doing to stymie crime in these neighborhoods, which would probably show that the police are increasing crime in these neighborhoods through various activities, including working with and supporting drug dealers and gang members, giving passes and creating winners and losers in street wars. So police accountability cannot occur because it would interfere with their plans to manipulate how crime flows. Police accountability cannot occur because it would expose all of that. And you have teams that are, police teams that are excluded from oversight, specifically. There's no checks and balances to ensure that the will of the people, or that accountability is going. We have an accountability office that has already said that they're not going to hold police accountable. So who takes the brunt of that is the people that are being played with, which is typically black and brown people in lesser economic situations.
By 2000, black individuals accounted for almost half the U.S. prison population. This disparity has lessened due to changes in sentencing and corrections policies, but are still imprisoned at a rate 5 times that of the white population in America.
I feel like the Portland Police Union is like the key when we talk about lobbying, when we talk about utilizing, manipulating. I don't want to say manipulating, just utilizing media, because again they're able to kind of like stand in the middle or stand in the way of any kind of progress, whether voters approve it or whether it's just what people are rallying for, calling for in the street. And for years, even before I was like really following, the Portland Police Union was very known as like, okay, that's whenever there's an officer involved shooting, whenever there's a police brutality case, Portland Police Union is going to come out there and they're just going to say whatever wild thing they're going to say about why it was justified, why the people are getting too sensitive about it. And eventually, after everyone stopped paying attention, arbitration is going to happen and someone's going to get their job back.
Here's an example of what Bruce is talking about with arbitration. The former head of the police union leaked false information implicating former Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty in a hit and run. Hardesty was one of the most outspoken commissioners, calling for more oversight of the Portland Police Bureau due to their use of force during the protests of 2020. He was fired by Mayor Ted Wheeler after the public demanded it. However, 2 years later, a Washington-based arbiter got him reinstated. Hardesty sued and eventually settled the lawsuit against the police union for $680,000.
Like any union, the police union is primarily a PR and negotiating firm. What they do is they negotiate the best possible outcomes for police officers. So what that includes is collecting information from police officers that would influence public opinion, creating an environment where their biased view of things looks like the only view of things. So when it comes to violent crime, that's a good thing for the police union. But violent crime allows them to respond in bigger ways and request bigger funding. when you look at their pattern of work, it's not like they're out here trying to stop violent crimes. So that's just the whole thing. The police union is not doing the people any favors. It's something that is there for literally police to look at getting a bigger paycheck.
There is rhetoric that defunding PPP has caused Portland to be crime-ridden. However, the defunding was a fraction of their overall budget and was eventually given back to them with an additional $5.2 million.
Defunding the police, as always, has always meant reducing the amount that we spend on carceral solutions and increasing the way that we look at fixing the environment in which crime is born. Not a terribly complicated thing, I think. Increasing education, increasing awareness, increasing counseling, dealing with trauma, keeping people in homes. These are things that, help to stimulate crime. Putting people in jail, locking them up, making them harder criminals, putting them back on the streets at random times, despite the sentences or whatever else, is not necessarily the best way. People don't even trust the criminal justice system from either side. Victims or should I say victims nor perpetrators don't trust the system. So we're dealing with a thing that's not trusted and has never succeeded in its mission. Police have never solved crime. Increased funding has only lowered the amount of crimes that are solved. So it's very clear that it's a money pit. But you'll notice that the police use every opportunity to look for extra funding just to do the same things they always do, whether it's funding for body cams, whether it's funding for oversight. We spent 2 years building an oversight committee that is not going to exist in any way that looks like what we voted for. And that costs a lot of money, and a lot of that money gets, again, pushed to the police budget so that they can do what they want. So I think it's really important to understand as we talk about defunding the police, all the ways the police are also increasing their spend. And every time we call for defunding, it typically leads to more money being spent. So gotta think about that a bit.
So yeah, again, just to bring it back, I think it starts with the money. It starts with finding wherever you can find alternatives, because I don't know, the studies, the anecdotes keep showing that when you can find alternatives and more holistic responses to be public health problems, public safety problems, that's usually better in the long term. Continuing to invest and just dump money into the police, I don't know, when we look around, it's like, does anyone feel safer?
Kaia Sand is Executive Director of Street Roots. She can provide insights into alternatives to Portland Police Bureau that are being explored.
There are too many police interactions that are about using a legal system to meet societal holes and gaps and pains. So in 2018, the Oregonian released a report that over half of all of arrests were of unhoused people. And that's an astonishing number. Over half of all arrests. That means that essentially this enormous police budget is being used disproportionately, to say the least, to attend to what's actually a broken safety net. And since then, Melissa Lewis, a really outstanding reporter, she worked on that original Oregonian reporting, but she went on to Reveal News, and she has studied not only Portland, but the West Coast up through 2020. Consistently, Portland, over half of all arrests are of unhoused people. A lot of those arrests are around so-called crimes of homelessness. It might be being described as an unwanted person, wrong person, wrong place. It could be, trespass. It can be disorderly conduct in the ways in which someone really is reacting out of trauma, and they're encountering a police officer yet again, and the whole encounter escalates. And so then what maybe started out in one situation ends up in another. So all these different ways in which we're essentially just using policing to attend to the fact that people are on the extreme margins of society in a country where, you know, billionaires are growing, and people are sinking further into poverty. Portland Street Response is an alternative public safety model. I should actually say, I hope it's the future of public safety, and that is to send out a crisis worker and a medic to street crises, or ideally any kind of crises that are non-criminal matters. So it's based on a model in Eugene that has been going on for 4 decades called Cahoots, and it has been highly successful in Eugene at essentially meeting crises so that they don't get larger, right? And oftentimes that means actually de-escalating the person who's making the phone call about the crisis. So it's something that in 2019, the Street Roots got very involved in. We saw the Oregonian numbers, over 50% of all arrests were of unhoused people. Some reporters interviewed the police chief at the time, who was police chief Danielle Outlaw, got her on record saying that police shouldn't be going out to a lot of these calls. The Willamette Week analyzed data and saw that every 15 minutes a so-called unwanted person phone call was coming through to 911. So essentially their operators were beleaguered, exhausted by picking up phone calls that really there was no good solution to, when their options were sending out the police or fire. So we started pushing. Street Roots analyzed what could be possible. On March 15th, 2019, we released a special issue, just called it as a placeholder, Portland Street Response, but because Commissioner Hardesty was already there with the idea, she elevated that idea, and then we started working on a campaign. A number of Street Roots vendors went out and interviewed other unhoused people, worked with Portland State to analyze the data. We, I think, interviewed 187 people on what an alternative model could look like. And then by the fall, City Council actually voted in a pilot, and that has gone forward. It is now a city program under the fire department. I would say it's under threat right now. We don't have the champions that we had early on. So the real challenge at this point is to get this institutionalized in a way where, just like fire or police, right? These are hard things to take away. That's what we need to get Portland Street Response to be. You know, the last first responder system, the fire department, was added in the 19th century. So we're saying this is really, you know, a 21st century way to go, is to start looking at what are crises now. It's not that there are fires everywhere like in the 19th century. It's more that we actually have personal fires that we have to attend to. And that takes a really humane, I think, loving approach in society.
Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, I should mention that I helped conduct the survey for Portland Street Response. Emily Green's reporting is a prime example of solutions journalism and how it can create positive change.
To reform the current system of policing really takes changing our mindsets about what safety looks like and for whom, and then looking at what it means to police, to try to create certain controls on society, and where I would say some of those controls and those fears can actually be rooted out at an earlier place. And by that I mean the things that we actually all really know, that there's often things that are being policed that if they were taken care of with better services, education, health, the basic needs, housing, then we wouldn't have a need to police them. I also think that, you know, it's sort of like if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if policing is the approach, then we're sort of taking the same approach no matter what the situation is. So if someone is having, a traumatic response to the fact that they have an untreated wound and they're in despair, they don't have housing, and they're fired up because of, they're firing on all cylinders in a way because of all of their extreme trauma. Someone coming in with a badge and a gun and saying that they are disorderly is not going to help. It's actually going to escalate it even more. So that's the hammer, everything looks like a nail, when actually maybe instead it's about meeting someone's needs. For instance, a medic attending to a basic wound, finding how we actually can provide housing, that housing can be a right. I mean, those are very different, right? One's a micro thing that you can do immediately, and then the housing, of course, is the large aspirational vision for society. But neither require a police response.
An article for the Portland Business Journal shows that Portland's street response would have ongoing federal funding if it wasn't for the hiring freeze Commissioner Gonzalez implemented that prevented the 24/7 expansion of the program, which was a requirement for federal funding. Portland's street response is one alternative to traditional policing being explored, and yet there is an effort to shut it down due to it even being an alternative. It's over-policing and brutalization of marginalized community members that these alternatives are being explored. In response to these alternatives, the police union has fabricated misinformation and attempted to manipulate the public opinion in order to continue harming vulnerable members of the community. However, there are stats showing Portland is far from the most dangerous city in America. In the next episode, we will be exploring homelessness in Portland. I've been contemplating how to end this episode. So, this music video was created using footage from the protests of 2020. Introducing Blacktacular.
I came out last night screaming Black Lives Matter, but now they hear me yelling out, all cops are bastards! See, my temper is freed from all the pepper spray. I use this Demi check to cop some weapons grade. Gas mask, toss them in the backpack with a fat sack and some earlocks and some earplugs. Tomorrow I can act fast, but the cops come through as we demonstrate. As you know, they always do their best to escalate.
Drone things used explosives and injured police, including just this past weekend, permanently blinding 3 federal officers with lasers.
They have the nerve to declare this march an unauthorized assembly when they've been abusing authority for the last 4 centuries. Using rubber bullets, flashbangs, shields, batons. This cop is out here dressed like he's out here to defuse a bomb. Against a girl with an umbrella trying to tell you to have some empathy. And so you ramp up the intensity and desperately, breathlessly go on an arresting spree. While you best believe she'll be right back here tomorrow screaming, I can't breathe.
You are projecting fear and violence nationwide in pursuit of obvious political objectives. Shame on you.
Please release your mind.
guidelines for the confines of the times we're living in. Don't be giving in to merry-go-round of clowns that sound so vivid when they're pumped the television speakers, because you know today the media ain't nothing but a freak show or a three-ring circus whose purpose is knee-jerk us and to hurt us and the feeling so worthless. So we're just gonna spirit to the clouds, your fears and your doubts. What's clear to me now is that a beer on a couch is not the only way to live, but the best way to die slowly. And if we could only get the fuck up out of chairs and say what we feel out loud, use our voices and our spirits to energize the crowd. I'm always smiling, always wilding, or screaming as loud as can be. Let her tempt to remind y'all, we are not all free. Now if you're hearing me, now if you're feeling me, I want you yelling from your belly, baby, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Yelling from your belly, baby, I can't breathe.
Disperse immediately to the west. Failure to adhere to this order may subject you to arrest, citation, or crowd control.